Welcome to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. Designed for everyone interested in responsible stewardship of the planet, covering topics related to food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Scott Billy.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sustainability Now. I'm Scott Billy. Today, I'll be your host, and we're going to be talking about one of the keys to expanding global uses of renewable energy, batteries. A lot of people are talking about the need for more storage when it comes to solar and wind, but very few people are working to solve it on a global level like our guest today. We're really excited to present Mathy Stanislaus, the interim director at the World Economic Forum's Global Battery Alliance. Prior to that, Mathy served as the Senior Obama Administration Office Director in many programs at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, including sustainable reuse of materials, solid and hazardous waste management, and contaminated land cleanup. He also led the United States engagement in the G7 to establish the A7 Alliance for Resource Efficiency to focus on the supply chain as a driver for greenhouse gas emission reduction and sustainability. Welcome, Matty.
Thanks, Scott. Great to be here.
All right. So, I touched on it a little bit in the intro, but I did want you to sort of delve in a little bit more as to why batteries are so important and the main reason for the World Economic Forum developing the Global Battery Alliance.
Sure. So we issued a report based on a global analytical modeling that shows that through 2030, the scaling up of batteries are crucial to drive greenhouse gas reduction. We identified that there could be a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation and power sector. So specifically, the scaling up of batteries is crucial for scaling up electrical vehicle deployment. And separately, having batteries enable the greater utilization and the greater availability of renewable energies are crucial for this transformation. So that is the reason why the Global Battery Alliance exists. In order to do so, we have to solve some really difficult problems. One is reducing the cost of batteries. Currently, that is the major impediment to the affordability of EV deployment. We also need to enable the kind of batteries that are designed for purpose for grid applications. So a number of the key levers, key actions that we've identified to bring down the cost is to increase the utilization of batteries in its first life, then enable the use of batteries for second use applications, be it off-grid, backup storage, and even fixed grid storage applications. And thirdly, enabling the recovery of materials from their batteries. So we're focusing in on how do we reduce the cost by scaling up kind of these circular economy levers. The other, I would say the dark underbelly that no one talks about in the green transformation is the fact that the current sourcing of materials comes with violations of human rights and the use of child labor. It is most acutely in the sourcing of cobalt, which largely comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and significant portions of that cobalt is sourced using child labor, and we're trying to address that. And I think the last major pillar that we're working on is enabling access to energy, clean energy, in places that currently do not have access to clean energy. Current focus is Africa, where we currently have communities that don't have access to reliable energy, or even if they do, it's episodic and using dirty fuels. If you can shift that it completely transforms education, it transforms economic production and economic activity. So those are the areas that we're working on, and we believe all of that can be achieved by creating jobs. We forecast 10 million jobs to be created across the value chain by 2030, and increasing economic productivity. We project an increment of $150 billion.
That's great. So in solving environmental issues, we're also solving for economic and social justice issues as well.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's really a great holistic approach. And for anything to be truly sustainable, it needs to tackle all of these things. So I really like where you were headed with the economic viability of batteries. You know, right now they're driving the price up of electric vehicles, EVs, as you were referring to them earlier. So I think if you could touch on that a little bit more about the efforts to drive production costs down, and then in the long run, making sure that we can actually recover those materials instead of mining for new ones.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And so a couple of the actions that we're working on our own is we have something that we're developing called a battery passport. And so that emerged as we've begun consulting with stakeholders throughout the value chain globally. And for example, when we talk to repurposers of batteries and even designers of batteries for first purpose, the availability of data in terms of the usage of batteries, the repair, refurbishment, what people generally call battery health, kind of really impedes the deployment of second use because of a significant cost of individualized battery testing. So if we make certain battery data available, it can then enable safe second use of batteries and enable to trace batteries at a cell level and then a pack level, so people have a better understanding of batteries, what cells have been repaired, so the greater confidence in both first use and second use applications. Then we talk to recyclers.
Expand a little bit on second use and how a battery winds up moving from one purpose to another.
Yeah, sure. So there's been a number of deployments of both backup use of EV batteries for at cell towers, at pumping stations, even commercial purposes, where you can store energy off the grid or store energy by your own renewable energy production at your facility. So it's about scaling up those kind of applications. So there are key impediments to that. The primary is you need to really assess a battery in terms of battery health. Is it safe? So currently, you currently have to do extensive testing, individualized on batteries to enable that. So if you have battery data, which is currently collected in something called the battery management system, but it is not made available to, for example, repurposers and recyclers. So what this battery passport would do would make available certain data while protecting other data to enable kind of a repurposing and avoid at least some of the testing that currently impedes the scaling up of second-use batteries, as well as the safety information to have confidence that a battery can be used safely. Now, let me also mention that when we talk about the lithium batteries, it's really not a single chemistry. You have multiple of chemistries, and those are good, and that innovation is great to design for particular purposes and increase performance. But from a recycling perspective, if you don't know the chemistry, you don't know how to best recover those particular materials. So what a battery passport would do, it will identify the categories of chemistry in a battery so that a recycler can better segregate batteries. So you then segregate batteries and recover those with the significant cobalt separately from those that have significant nickel and other kind of chemistries. So that could reduce the cost of recycling by 25%.
So having access to that data allows them to not have to do their own testing, but they can just separate it the same way that we separate cans and bottles with the curbside collection. They could just say, cobalt batteries go over here, nickel batteries go over there.
That's exactly right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah, so you were saying, we've got the demand is growing and growing, and as more renewable energy comes online and more electric vehicles are replacing internal combustion engines, the projection right now is somewhere in the 15 to up to nearly 20 times more batteries are going to be needed in order to meet the demand. And I know that the Global Battery Alliance has sort of a three-pronged approach to helping make that happen.
Yeah, sure. What we project is broadly that the battery value chain will have to grow about 19 times by 2030. Now, if you break that apart, you would have to grow recycling over 25 times. You would have to grow cell production probably on the order of 15 to 16 times. You have to grow the active material processing and raw material refining probably around 10 to 12 times. And you have to grow raw material mining, depending on the particular materials, anywhere up to about 24 times. So that gives you a sense of the huge magnitude to really realize this transformation that we all want to do. So a major thing that we're focusing on is driving what we're calling a circular battery value chain as a major driver towards the greenhouse gas reduction. The battery passport is one effort to enable circularity. We are working with multiple governments around the globe to align policies around recycling, around data protection and data access, around potential financial incentives, and how do we best align these kind of policy goals to drive a circular battery value chain. A second prong is establishing a low carbon economy to drive this. So some of the things that we've identified in our study is things like infrastructure, smart charging infrastructure, make sure it's standardized globally. Right now, there is not a standardized approach. Make sure it's safe, smart charging, looking at grid and enabling the policy and infrastructure investments to enable fixed grid applications. So it's a bit of kind of the policy side. I also think that there needs to be substantial public investment, either direct or indirect, to kind of nurture the market or de-risk the market. Some countries are fronting a significant portion of the infrastructure cost. For example, smart charging infrastructure as an incentive to enable electric vehicle deployment. So we're working on potentially putting a set of recommendations to how do we best drive the kind of infrastructure to enable the uptake of both electric vehicle deployment as well as kind of the grid-based storage. And the last thing we're working on is safeguarding human rights and economic development. The major focus of activity currently is looking at cobalt. We've established a partnership with some of our members, the Responsible Business Alliance, with UNICEF, and a few other entities to take on and tackle this difficult problem with a focus initially on the Democratic Republic of Congo, looking at how do we best establish standards for artisanal mining, establish a monitoring regime and monitoring program so that there's confidence and there's standards to ensure that child labor is not involved. We have some prospective work on lithium, trying to address the questions about lithium and its environmental impact, particularly water impact, and potentially how do we ensure protection of local communities in that process, in particular indigenous rights, where, for example, in Chile, there are questions about indigenous rights.
So one of the things that you touched on was job creation. Can you expand a little bit about the new areas that new types of employment that we'll be seeing coming out of this effort?
Yeah, I mean, so what we have projected is, if you look at the 19x growth, I would say the largest growth sectors will probably be the middle of the value chain, that is the active materials, cell and pack production, and then the automobile vehicles themselves. So we see economic growth substantially in each of those sectors. On the far upstream end, there's a lot of effort in, particularly I would say the lithium producing companies to not only ramp up their production, but also, I would say, pull the value chain into those countries using direct and indirect methods. And some in Chile, they're trying to push a mandate that X% of lithium needs to be then manufactured into component parts in Chile. So in Australia, they're incentivizing that parts of the supply chain to be pulled into Australia. So I would say there's a debate about what's most optimum in terms of the component parts of cell and pack and battery being closer to the mining versus the automobile. I would say the majority, if not pretty significant opinion, that it should be closer to the automobile manufacturing and not the mining. But this is the kind of the geopolitics that's playing out right now.
Right. It makes a lot of sense for the countries that are mining the raw materials to want to move themselves farther along in the value chain instead of just selling cheap raw materials and letting someone else do all of the high-tech, high-profit margin work.
Yep.
Ideally, if we could get it all done in the same place, that would be the best scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Mine it, process it, build it into something. That would be, the local economy model would be awesome.
Yep, exactly.
You touched on the battery passport. Maybe we could dig into that a little deeper and talk about how that is aimed to sort of get a handle on all of this process.
Well, I mean, I would say that what it seeks to do is leveraging this unique and historic moment in human history. And that is that we are in this data era that we've never been in before, where we can log and track and trace using data in a very cheap way. Right? So it's being deployed, I hate to give a bad example in some people's minds, cyber currency, but cyber currency has taken advantage of kind of a lot of this digital technology. So we have everything from, we can trace from a mine every step of the way into a smelter and into a battery, the use of the battery, and then post-use of the battery. It's really about how do we ensure that, how do we create a value proposition to reveal these opportunities, but also how do we protect data while we're doing it? We don't want to make all data available to everyone. You could lose market advantage, lose proprietary investments.
Yeah, there's a lot of intellectual property hidden in that data.
Well, exactly. So we've done the stakeholders consultation around the globe. I'll give you a quick summary of what groups of stakeholders have said. They see battery passport from electric vehicle OEMs. They say that done properly, it could increase residual value and therefore shift and increase the return of investment. If done well, it could enable liability protection in a way that currently is not, because currently, very generic, where many jurisdictions, the original manufacturer is responsible for risk associated with the product, even if ownership changes over time and even if the usage changes over time. I would say the cell and EV, what allows it to do is to authenticate greenhouse gas emissions. There's a big push to authenticate greenhouse gas emissions, and there's a real scrutiny by just generic representations of greenhouse gas footprint. Again, shifting back to the OEMs, I would say both governments and consumers are really challenging OEMs to demonstrate that the materials are not being sourced, using child labor, using violations of human rights. You have repurposers and recyclers who say, our ability to scale up investment, is predicated upon reducing the cost, which then enables the shifting of the business case of, second use deployment and recycling. I would say investors who have recently said, we're no longer just going to ask for yearly sustainability reports. We want authentication. We want database authentication. Some big investors, BlackRock, have said this, and others. We want a database and real data to demonstrate that there's no reason why you can't show it from a data perspective. So we're no longer in a place where, the downstream can say there's no way for us to know. It's a question of how do we put in a data infrastructure that is trusted across the value chain. So it drives a particular purpose, but it enables the kind of security that we want. So we're in the process of battery passport construction. We'll be having a demo version of it by end of this year. And what it would be is, in the parlance of there's people who do this, it would be a digital individual twin of a battery. So for every battery, you'd be able to trace all of the pertinent data, pertinent categories that you identified, the greenhouse gas footprint, the sourcing of the material, where along the supply chain materials are sourced, did it adhere to established standards. So we're currently focusing in on just a few categories. We're focusing on greenhouse gas, child labor, and then establishing a battery identity. Ultimately, what we want to do is to have that being broadly to include other pertinent issues like water impacts, for example. And ultimately, our goal is to build this up over a couple of years at a time so we can issue what we're calling a quality seal to distinguish the highest performance batteries from the middle performance batteries, from the poor performance batteries, so the market and consumer choice can further drive improvement in the profile and the footprint of batteries.
You can start to make your own choices as to whether you want a higher priced, longer lasting, better performing battery, or a lower priced one that may or may not last as long and perform as well.
Exactly. There are some efforts to enable a consumer to identify how to best optimize their battery life. So there are some efforts to have diagnostics in your car to tell you what's the best temperature, what's the best time, so that you maximize the life of your battery. So there's some diagnostics that are being developed to kind of enable how do we best enable the extension of the life through understanding, pertinent factors regarding when you should recharge your battery in the most optimal way.
Right. It feels like that is a great opportunity to eliminate a lot of the waste that happens. Not treating your battery well leads to premature failure, which, leads to waste. If we could solve that and then get the infrastructure in place to really be circular and get those materials turned back into batteries instead of into landfills, then that's going to go a long way towards bringing the overall environmental impact and economic one down as well.
Yeah. And let me just reinforce this point, right? So we are not going to make the transformation if the battery costs are what they are, right? So we have to optimize battery usage for electric vehicles. We have to increase the investment for that purpose. We have to deploy second-use batteries in a safe way, and then we have to recover materials. Unless we're willing to cumulatively do that, to drive the cost down, and I would say more being experimented in the US and in China, the idea of what's called vehicle to grid, which means when vehicles are not being used for transportation purposes, it can be connected to the grid and actually serve as a storage device for the grid itself, meaning renewable energy produced can be stored in a battery. There's some experiments of using large fleets like buses, electric buses to serve in that purpose, which further extends the utilization of batteries. So cumulatively, what we want to do is optimize batteries to the greatest extent possible. That optimization would then drive down the cost of a battery. So that's a significant theory of change to really scaling up electric vehicle deployment and renewable energy.
That's great. And then one of the other big initiatives that you're working on that you kind of mentioned earlier is the Cobalt Action Partnership. Let's take a little bit of a deeper look into that one as well.
Sure. And so the Cobalt Action Partnership it really emerged to deal with this difficult problem. The fact is that about 70% of cobalt is produced in the Congo. And, it for lots of reasons, you have poverty, you have lots of complicated factors that result in children being significantly used to produce the cobalt ore. And so what we've done is facilitated put together a partnership to kind of lead that effort, to establish standards, establish some monitoring elements to monitor mine sites, to also invest in communities so that you begin shifting children into educational opportunities, you begin putting in worker protections for adult workers. So dealing with this complicated problem, but really bringing together, frankly, the global experts in this space together to align to solve this difficult problem. So we're moving forward in the Cobalt Action Partnership to achieve those goals.
So it's really that you've got to solve it by solving it, not regulating it. You can't just say, don't put kids in the mine anymore. You've got to find a way to staff the mine responsibly and giving the kids an alternative to a better education and other employment opportunities beyond what they're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very good point. I would say that the typical person from the developed world will say, well, why can't we just regulate our way out of this? The fact is, it's a systemic problem. And you need to deal with the systemic problem, the systemic solution. So you need to develop standards and hold companies accountable. We also need to deal with the fact that families, collectively have chosen to do this. So you need to address alternative lifestyles and address standards of work practices, and working with cooperatives, and providing the training on the ground. So it's this complex set of things that need to happen to really deal with this systemic issue.
Absolutely. I mean, when having your children put in a mine is a better solution than the alternative of starving, that's a big issue to solve, and you're not just going to regulate your way out of that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to deal with what we call the underlying conditions, right? If you don't with the underlying conditions, when I talk to uh, uh, organizations who work on this issue in the ground, they say, well, you just can't say and tell a family, take your child out of a mine on day one and put him into the school, because on day two, that child will be back working in the mine. Okay. So.
Right. Yes, absolutely. That's it's a big topic to tackle, and it's really impressive that you guys are going after it and addressing it rather than just sort of trying to sweep it under the rug and hope that nobody will notice.
Yeah.
And that kind of takes us along to the third big pillar, which is providing energy to areas like the one we just described. I'm sure the Congo is prime candidate for that third piece of the pie here.
Yeah, so we've established a partnership with the World Bank, with the government of Denmark, with an institute, with something called Faraday Institute, which is focusing on energy access, working with a number of leaders in Africa, some of the leadership from environmental ministries of South Africa, Rwanda, of Nigeria, looking at how do we take advantage of this opportunity to provide energy access in Africa. So we're looking at, we've just done, we've begun scoping it. So how do we look at opportunities for second use batteries to be used safe, but also ensure that the back end of end of life recycling systems and logistics are addressed so that it doesn't result in illegal dumping that causes harm in Africa. So we're kind of constructing what we're calling a roadmap that is led and built and supported by the leadership from Africa. So we hope to develop this and finish this roadmap by the end of this year, early next year. Now, I should also mention two other nearer term recommendations that we're going to be issuing most likely in October or November. One is addressing the issue of, transboundary regulation. Transboundary regulation in this area, it has largely to do with trying to regulate and in some cases prevent the shipment of waste materials to developing countries because of the history of dumping and harm to developing countries. So important set of rules is called the Basel Convention. But because they're focusing on waste, what happens is the net has become so broad, and what gets caught in that net is our legitimate transactions for repair and refurbishment of batteries, sending of batteries for second use. So we're going to be issuing a paper that does the analysis, but also sets forth potential opportunities to distinguish legitimate transactions from those transactions that need to be scrutinized for fraud. So we've begun the process of how do we, the paper will set up some potential avenues, it could be country-to-country pilots, it could be using traceability schemes to begin grappling with this need, because, the global economy is still a global economy, there are capacities and capability that's spread throughout the world, and to really optimize what we're calling circularity, really to enable legitimate transactions in an open and transparent way. to enable that. The other thing that we're working on is a lead acid battery best practices document, which basically pulls the best practices from the US, best practices from Europe, and then with the goal of putting in front of policymakers in emerging markets so that can be adopted in the emerging markets, but also using some of the studies used in emerging markets, because one of the key issues is how do we address informal sector, which is a significant part of the economy in a lot of emerging markets.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like the passport is a great way. It sort of wraps right back around into this whole process, because it would be really simple for corporations in, let's say the U.S. to just ship all their old batteries to the Congo and say, we've done this as a humanitarian effort to provide, storage for clean energy, and then wash their hands of it. But then you haven't addressed that unless you've got an infrastructure in place to deal with those batteries once they're done with their second life. And, how do they actually get really recycled back into batteries instead of just winding up in an unregulated landfill somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And I actually think that given the politics, you're not even going to be able to make that shipment unless we're able to put in place a very rigorous, transparent system so that everyone, be it the leadership in Africa, the leadership in the developed world, those that scrutinize these transactions have confidence that it's going to be, one, used safely for storage, and then once it's used safely, that there is a system in place to take that back, be it taken back to a developed country for recycling or to a legitimate recycling facility in Africa. So those are all those things have to be in place to enable these opportunities to meet this need.
Sounds like if you can pull this off, you will have addressed just about all of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals.
Well, I mean, we like to think that we touch on a lot of them. Clearly, we think by providing energy access, it addresses education, health, reducing inequalities, work, economic issues. We think, addressing the child labor issues, we'll have to address poverty, and obviously affordable clean energy is crucial, and obviously the link to the Paris Agreement. So, we think it addresses, but these really difficult problems. And, one thing that I would like everyone who hears this to understand is that the global transformation that we all want cannot be done by just saying, well, let's buy an electric vehicle. We really have to, push policymakers and push, frankly, everyone in the private side as well, is requiring the accountability, the transparency, and the kind of investments to drive the future. I think people tend to simplify the opportunity of global transformation without doing the hard work of how to do it. Even the EV transformation and renewable energy transformation, we don't want to come on the backs of child labor, on the backs of violating labor rights. So, we have a responsibility to push a systemic solution while we're trying to address another systemic problem,
Right. Yeah, it's definitely all wrapped up together. And it's like, when recycling first started, people thought, oh, I put my stuff in the blue bin instead of the trash can. I've done my part. And you've got to dig a little bit deeper than that and look at the real issues in order to address them all. And it's really impressive that what you guys have going on here. And since you mentioned our listeners and what they can do to get involved, I'd like to touch on that a little bit more as well. And just as a note, Matty has a great presentation that outlines all of this material. We'll have that available on the show notes page on sustainabilitynow.global. And we'll also have a list of all the resources that I'm about to mention here as well. But what can people do to get involved?
Well, I mean, I think they could be champions of change. I highly recommend, pulling down the presentation materials and really ask the hard questions, from your policymaker, from your, if you're going to choose to buy an electric vehicle, even from your electric vehicle manufacturers, that, pushing a systemic problem, really support those who are trying to drive the systemic problem, ensuring that human rights are addressed, greenhouse gas impacts are authenticated, but also I think pushing your policymakers, the things like incentives for energy storage, for increasing clean renewable energy, standardization of smart charging, even investment in smart charging in a scaled up way, all those kind of things are really crucial. I think, whether it's local government, pushing local government to enable off-grid storage, is an important thing. So you can push policies at the local government level, at the state level, and at the federal level. So that's my pitch.
All right. Do you know of any grassroots organizations that are sort of mobilizing people to tackle any of the pillars of what you're working on here?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there are. I can't say that I know of a single governmental organization that focuses on the footprint that we're talking about. I think there's a lot of organizations working on, I would say, the broad climate change advocacy. But I would have to say that I've not seen any that kind of brings the human rights, child labor dimension into the electrification issues that we have. There's one group that is a member of the Global Battery Alliance that is addressing scaling up electrification and doing that in a transparent way. There are other groups who are members of the alliance who are focusing on the child labor issues. Many of them are focused in Europe and some of them in Africa. So.
Well, we do have listeners all over the globe, so this could be a little bit of a call to action for anybody listening to this that's involved with different organizations. We'll provide the materials for you to take it out to take up the charge.
That's great.
That's great. So do you, I know you sent me over a few different documents that we'll be posting on our website. Any other links or books or anything that you'd like people to read to help educate themselves?
Yeah, maybe one of your links includes the vision report, which contains a lot of the things that I've mentioned to you. So if you're interested in reading that, the other thing I would mention is that we want to hold ourselves accountable. So we establish a set of principles that we abide by. That includes things like driving a circular value chain, committing to no use of child labor, driving renewable energies, energy access. So we had, I'm trying to think, 43 of our companies who've endorsed, members with many of them companies who've endorsed our principles, and the cumulative market value is over $1 trillion. So, those are some of the things, and the press release is also part of those, the links that I sent to you. And then the other thing I will say is be on the lookout for some issues of some of the reports that I mentioned to you in mid-fall. So you can go back on the website and that should be available to you.
That's great. We can always update our page as they become available. This will air here in the early fall, but then the podcast will live on beyond that. So we can continually update the information on the show notes page as more up-to-date data comes out. Great. Any other parting words that you have for our listeners?
Well, maybe I'll just repeat myself. I think it's important that people understand that the global transformation comes with some dark underbelly. I think understanding that and advocating that, the importance of doing this systemically, the importance of incorporating human rights in a prominent way. These are not easy issues to talk about. These are even harder issues to address. But I would just ask anyone interested in the benefits of the global electrical transformation through EVs also always talk about the need to incorporate all of these social justice and transparency issues. So with that, I thank you again, Scott, for this opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We're looking forward to, continuing the conversation as we go. Just in parting, I want to remind everybody that, this is a community. We aren't here to solve the problems for anyone. We're here to help expose what's happening in the world and find people who are tackling these issues and publicize what they're up to. And really, we all need to get together to help make a difference. And that's the message on part of the Sustainability Now community is if everybody works together, we can shape a world that works.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now. Visit sustainabilitynow.global to find resources related to today's program. While you're there, pledge your support by making a contribution to help us shape a world that works. And remember to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.